And welcome back to the Upside Sports Network. My name is Michael. Appreciate you guys joining us for another great day of sports anyway. A lot of news to get to, so without further ado, let's get right into the update. Thank you guys for joining us, James and Ryan. Thanks for the appreciation there. Really appreciate that. Lots of updates, so let's get right into them, Ryan. Thanks for joining us. So right off the bat, let's start with Major League Baseball. Right off the bat, we noticed that Texas Rangers have fired manager Chris Woodward. I know a number of you out there, Ranger fans, seeing as how I live in Texas, I'm very familiar with how upset you guys have been all year long with how he's managed that bullpen, how he's managed starters in the game, sticking with players too long, not calling on the right guy, that kind of thing. And apparently the front office has been hearing those objections all season long. After the trade deadline, they realized there just wasn't really a path forward after this season with manager Chris Woodward. They used him essentially this offseason to be able to get Corey Seeger. The relationship that he had definitely played a part in the bargaining or the negotiations anyway with Corey Seager, his familiarity with playing for him. So I imagine that was part of the reason why they kept him last year. Not saying that they were thinking of firing him at that point, but at least it had entered their minds at that point that it might have been a possibility. This year, though, they were hoping for more improvement, and at the beginning of the season, they were around 500 after 2 months. Since then, though, it's just been a slow, steady downhill motion anyway. That bullpen really hasn't performed very well. The hitting's been inconsistent, and that's the main reason why Chris Woodward is now gone. Thank you, Ryan. Appreciate that. Yeah, we added this animation anyway with the intro video a while back, but I've been trying to find a way to actually use it. And now with our daily updates, and anytime we go live, we'll actually be able to use some of that cool new software we have. So thank you guys for joining us again. But for the Rangers, he was under 500 in his entire tenure with the Texas Rangers, taking over for Jeff Bannister, the former manager there. Just things did not go well with Chris Woodward. The Rangers were very happy with him all the way up until the point where they weren't. And so they kind of informed him of their decision today. GM Chris Young and President of Baseball Ops John Daniels making the call. And the next hire, I'd imagine, probably is going to they're hoping that next manager leads them into contention next year. That's part of the reason why I think that the Rangers made the decision to go ahead and get rid of Chris Woodward. He was a great manager for a struggling baseball team, helping relay fundamentals, build young players, that kind of thing. And they have gotten some good play out of some younger players. But now's the time to really push the pedal forward and actually get greater consistency from those players and try to strive for playoff success and possibly even more so than that. But it seems like the Rangers are ready to kind of move on, even as far back as a couple of months ago, after all the acrimony they had, like I mentioned, with the bullpen. But it just seems like it's now the time. In fact, John Daniels, the President of Baseball Ops, said, GM Chris Young and I had a very difficult task of informing Chris Woodward of our decision today. In his tenure as the Rangers manager, Chris worked tirelessly under what was at times difficult circumstances. He has been dedicated and passionate in his efforts to improve the on-field performance of the Texas Rangers and has been greatly appreciated. He has represented this organization with class and dignity. We have had several extensive discussions over the past several weeks, and while the team's current performance is certainly a big part of this decision, we're also looking at this from the looking at the future as the Rangers continue to develop a winning culture and put the pieces together to compete for the postseason year in and year out. We felt the change in leadership was necessary at this time. On behalf of the entire Texas Rangers organization, we thank Chris and wish him and his family the very best. As you might expect, yes, this season was not going the Rangers' way, so that's kind of part of it anyway as to why they were getting rid of him. But the Rangers also wanted to make a move for the future. They want a coach that can actually get them some postseason victories, get them into the postseason, and Woodward's just not been able to do that in his tenure with the Rangers. Now, that's not necessarily his fault. They haven't had a good team. They trimmed a lot of payroll. They just haven't invested on the Major League product anyway, nearly as much as the minor leagues, and that's certainly shown. But now it's time to really put the pedal to the metal. Yahoo Sports anyway had the headline for Chris Woodward being fired as Rangers fire manager after spending $500 million in free agency. Yeah, $500 million over the course of those contracts. They only brought in 3 players. Now they still have a bucket of money to still spend this offseason. We'll see where they invest it, but there's other teams that are now going to invest that money this offseason as well. Baltimore Orioles are expected to take a jump in payroll. The Chicago Cubs as well. So there's going to be teams that aren't necessarily perennial offseason players for those or off-season spenders that are not going to be competition for the Rangers for those top free agents. We'll see what acquisitions they make to try to improve the team. Yeah, I know, Kent. I know you were one of the ones that was wanting Chris to be gone, but it finally has happened, so I'm sure you're celebrating anyway. But without further ado, let's kind of move on to the next headline from MLB. Walker Buehler is officially out for the year. His flexor strain that has kept him out since early June just hasn't been getting any better. In fact, it seems to be getting worse. So the Dodgers are going to go ahead and shut him down for the rest of the year. They had hoped to get him back before the postseason began anyway, maybe even in the postseason, but it's just not going to happen. Dodgers get DeGrom. Well, that'd be an interesting move for them. I mean, they're going to need some starters now. Dustin May, on the other side of the coin for the Dodgers, is set to come back this Saturday, so at least they're getting some relief, or some relief as far as from injuries anyway. But there's still a big drop-off from Walker Buehler to anybody else in that rotation. They don't have Clayton Kershaw either. That was one of my worries at the beginning of the season, is that all these pitchers that they're allowing to go out the system, they're now going to have to rely on a bunch of young guys. And they've performed very admirably so far this year. But you're still talking about playoff baseball anyway, and we're talking about the Los Angeles Dodgers, the team with a great big budget that spent a lot of money on Freddie Freeman, etc. They weren't willing to keep Max Scherzer, Corey Seager, Kenley Jansen. The list goes on and on. And now we're here where we are right now. They spent money on Trevor Bauer, obviously a horrible investment. We've seen what happened, or that he's pitched, I think, 1 month anyway with the Dodgers, and has since not been able to take the field. He's still got 1 year left on that deal, $35 million. He is suspended, so that money's not really counting against them as much anyway. But that's still a big investment for them. I believe he's still getting paid on that as well. So kind of take everything with a grain of salt when it comes to the LA Dodgers. As much talent as they've had over the past 5-6 years in their dominance of the NL West, it seems like times are changing for them. As far as the National League goes, maybe the Dodgers' time might finally be coming to an end, and teams like the Padres, even though they have to figure out the Fernando Tatis Jr. situation, the New York Mets, the Atlanta Braves, those type of teams who are coming up, maybe it's their time to really shine. So, moving on, the New York Yankees dropped another game tonight anyway. They're now 2-10 in their last 12 games and have been shut out in 4 of their last 9 games overall. Of course, for me, this is more of just a, late August skid. They're not going to really be affected by this as they go into the postseason. This is more about the team in general. I don't like the acquisitions they made at the beginning of the year. I thought they could have done better. I don't like the acquisitions they made at the trade deadline. Again, I thought they could have done better. Both times I thought they went a little bit cheap for what the New York Yankees should and have historically always done, instead of going out and spending the top prospect to get Luis Castillo and saying, the heck with it, we'll figure it out next year. They chose to go a little bit cheaper and stick to their guns, and instead they lose him to the Mariners. Mariners, by the way, are going to make the postseason for the first time in 21 years. That's a fantastic thing for their organization, no matter what they do in the postseason. Just making it that far would be fantastic for them moving forward, and they have a dynamic talent in Julio Rodriguez to build around. But for the Yankees, losing 10 of their last 12, it's just not gone well. That starting staff still has a lot of question marks on it, and of course the Blue Jays have had their struggles recently, but not nearly to the level the Yankees have had. Anthony Rizzo had a blow up in the dugout today to try to rally the troops, and it didn't work. So things are a little bit tough right now for the Yankees. So sorry, Yankee fans, but it seems like it's going to continue at least for another few days. We'll see if they can shake off the cobwebs. They do have the AL MVP on that roster. We'll see if he can kind of jolt them out of it. But for the Yankees, though, I wonder what they're going to do this offseason. Now that Judge is going to be a free agent, they seem to have to keep him. But the Baltimore Orioles, yes, Ryan, the Baltimore Orioles are definitely on the up and come. We'll see if they can continue their strides forward. Last bit of news, of course, is that Dustin May is coming back for the Dodgers. We mentioned that a little bit with the Walker Buehler news, but for Dustin May, this is about keeping him healthy. You don't want to stretch him out too far, and with the needs in that starting staff right now for the Dodgers, I worry that they might push him to go a little bit further in a game than they otherwise might have. For Dustin May, maybe we're expecting to get 80 good pitches out of him in his first start. Maybe you now push that to 85, 87, and if he's still got another batter, maybe you let him get over 90. That is not what you want to do with Dustin May. It's August, And yes, you have needs on that starting staff. Yes, your bullpen isn't as good as it has been in the past, but you better watch out for for the starters that you do have. Otherwise, you'll be in an even worse predicament come postseason time. Moving on to the NBA, the only bit of news out of there is that first, the Sixers and Ben Simmons have finally settled their grievance anyway. The terms were not disclosed, but for Ben Simmons, this finally puts that chapter behind him. The other bit of news, a little bit more importantly though, is that Giannis Antetokounmpo said that everybody would love to play for the Chicago Bulls, and I saw videos of him getting up to 102. Yeah, Dustin May is throwing a lot better, but for Giannis anyway, he said he would love to play for Chicago. Anybody would love to play for Chicago, but that he's committed to the Milwaukee Bucks for now. Every player likes to throw that caveat on the end of their comments to the press anyway, and this is the first time we're really hearing Giannis talk about any other team other than the Bucks, and that's a little bit surprising, seeing as how he's now won a title there. He's definitely a family man, has gotten his entire all of his family there with him there in Milwaukee. I'm curious to see if this is just talk, and that he's saying, hey, we're an hour away from Chicago. I kind of live in the area, so Chicago's not that bad of a place. The Bulls, we played in the postseason. They've got an up-and-coming roster. Good on you. Maybe he's just giving them a pat on the back for the moves they've made and for the history of the franchise, of course, with Michael Jordan. Maybe that was just one of his idols there, and he doesn't want to talk bad about his childhood favorite team. Maybe that's part of it, but for a player of an opposing team that's an hour away, considered a rival, sort of anyway, at least over the past couple of years anyway, saying that everybody would love to play in Chicago, that's a little bit disconcerting if you're a Milwaukee Bucks fan. Sorry you're having to hear this, as I'm sure you don't want to lose Giannis, but I think we're a long way away from anybody really thinking Giannis is going to want out, but maybe this at least gets people churning. Maybe in a couple of years we could start to consider it, but this is going to start that avalanche down that hill as we get closer and closer to the end of his contract anyway. But for now, Giannis is staying a Buck, so you have nothing to worry about. Sorry, Bucks fans, you had to hear this coming from your favorite player today. He's got some cleanup that he's got to do with Bucks fans tomorrow. Moving on to the NFL, there's a number of news items from there, so let's just kind of jump right in. First and foremost, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers have signed defensive end Carl Nassif. If you remember, he originally started his career there with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, accruing 12.5 sacks over 2 seasons. That earned him a 3-year, $25 million contract with the Las Vegas Raiders. He then became the first openly gay player in the NFL, and things didn't necessarily go as intended anyway with that team. The high motor guy, definitely brought in by John Gruden's team, thought that he was more of a grinder type of a player for them. You remember Gruden's grinders back when Gruden was considered a great coach in the league. Gruden's, of course, no longer there. His issues off the field are well documented, so this is more about Carl Nassib. Things did not go well with the Raiders. He only gained 4.5 sacks there in 2 years, was cut this year to save $8 million in cap space for the Raiders. That move allowed them to go out and make the trade for Davante Adams. Obviously, a much better move for the Raiders. For Carl Nassib, though, and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, they needed some depth at that outside linebacker defensive end spot. They have Joe Tryon there. He was a draft pick last year, had some flashes of brilliance there, but they needed some depth after an injury in the preseason to one of their other veteran linebackers, and so Carl Nassib was brought in. We'll see how productive he can be. He's 29 years old, so maybe he's got a little bit of juice left in that tank, and he did have a lot of success there in his first go-round. How often do you get to come back to the place where it all began and show how much better you are, et cetera, how much you've grown as a person? For him, off the field, things couldn't have been more different for him from changing from his time with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers till now. Congratulations to Carl Nassib on the changes you've made to your life to be able to make these type of moves, and we're hoping all the best for you. Excuse me. We're hoping all the best for you with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Moving on to the Baltimore Ravens. Marcus Peters has been activated off of the PUP list. Of course, he was out all of last year after suffering an injury in the preseason. The entire Ravens players, anyway, seemed to suffer a lot of injuries last year. They lost like 5 or 6 different players before the season even began to injury, and not just, hey, this is a backup guy. No, they're talking about their top 2 corners, all 3 of their running backs, safeties, etc. They're very happy to have Marcus Peters back. He's one of a dying breed at the cornerback position. He likes to be one of those ball hawking type of cornerbacks. Nowadays, you just see the guys try to make the tackles, surefire tackles nowadays, maybe defense the pass, not necessarily sell out for the interception. There's only a few of those cornerbacks left. Diggs from the Dallas Cowboys is one of them. Peters is another. So they're very few and far between. So hopefully Marcus Peters continues to be the great player that he was before that injury. I imagine he's probably going to lose a step after suffering that injury last year, but we'll see if he can regain that step as the year goes by. The New Orleans Saints have signed linebacker John Bostic, who started his career with the Chicago Bears, since spent the last 3 years with the Washington Commanders organization. He's kind of a middle-of-the-road linebacker at this point. They did lose a linebacker due to injury in the preseason game the other day against the Texans, so that's the need for the linebacker there. And he probably makes the 53-man roster if I had to guess. They need some linebacker depth there, and he definitely fills that void for them perfectly. There was a trade today between the Philadelphia Eagles and the Seattle Seahawks, yet again. This trade has J.J. Arcega-Whiteside going to the Seahawks in exchange for safety Ugo Umadi. So this trade, kind of more about the back end of the roster, of course, but for the Eagles, they trade away their former second-round pick. Things have not gone well for him. They had a lot of failed picks at that wide receiver spot. Arcega-Whiteside was one of the biggest anyway. So the Seahawks hoping to get some more offensive juice. They've got a lot of seventh-rounders that are fighting for roster spots right now. Maybe this is about getting them competition in the preseason. Maybe they see something in Whiteside that the Eagles weren't able to get out of him. But in either event, this ends the very tumultuous time for Arcega-Whiteside with the Eagles. For the Eagles, though, the return on this Ugo Umadi, I don't expect him to be a starter. In fact, I think it's more of a depth trade here to see if he can make the 53-man. There's no guarantee that either one of these players makes the 53 of the other squad. So kind of a back end of the roster trade there. The Miami Dolphins have signed Mackenzie Alexander after losing cornerback Trill Williams for the year due to injury. Now, Mackenzie Alexander, you might have recognized that name. Big-time cornerback anyway, out of, I want to say, LSU. Has spent the last several years with the Minnesota Vikings organization, former second-round pick. Things have not gone well for him over the last year, though. Gave up 119 passer rating against all the throws that he saw last year. By far his worst. He's still a very good corner when he's motivated. We'll see if he can be motivated here with the Miami Dolphins, as he probably slots in as their 3, 4, 5 corner, somewhere in that mix. But we'll see if he can even break camp after having such a bad year last year. I imagine after having that bad year, he's going to be very motivated to try to get one more contract here in the NFL. This one-year deal hopefully will help spur that for him. The Denver Broncos have also activated Randy Gregory off of the PUP list. You might remember he had signed or had agreed in principle to a 5-year, $70 million contract with the Dallas Cowboys earlier this offseason, and then said, nah, y'all want to make the guarantees not so guaranteed, etc. So I'm going to take the same deal that you offered me, and I'm going to turn around and give it to the Denver Broncos. And they, without hesitation, said, yep, we'll accept that deal, no problem. They're very happy to bring him in, even though he is a little bit older. He doesn't have a lot of wear and tear on his body, of course, due to the injuries and suspensions that he's faced in his career. And he seems to have turned his life around as far as those suspensions are concerned. So we'll see if he can keep his head up and fly right in Denver now that he's away from the Denver Broncos. And basically his second father anyway in Jerry Jones. But we'll see how he does in Denver. Wishing you all the best, Randy. You have a fantastic career so far. Hoping nothing but the best for you there. But for him, after he signed that deal with the Denver Broncos, he had shoulder surgery because he wanted to wait until after his contract was signed. Now he seems to be coming back. We'll see if he's able to play week 1, but he's at least off of the PUP list, and it sounds like all signs are good to go for Randy Gregory and the Broncos. The other headline that I mentioned that I put in the title of this video is that Alvin Kamara is expected to be suspended, not this year. It sounds like the assault or the battery charge that he got on Pro Bowl weekend is going to be adjudicated the rest of this year anyway in the legal system. They want to see how that resolves first before making their determination on what actions the NFL should take. This is a little bit surprising to me. I thought maybe the way the assault went down, the battery that he committed, just how violent it was, literally just completely blindsiding the guy, the other guy not even getting his hands up to defend himself. Yeah. I mean, there's video out there from him going, it was a nightclub incident. I was actually in Vegas at the time when this happened, and no, I was not at the Pro Bowl, but I was there for other things. But this is really worrisome for the NFL from the standpoint they let Deshaun Watson off because the arbiter only gave him 6 games. Sounds like that's going to be on appeal, move to a year, maybe even more, if the NFL gets their way of an indefinite suspension from the adjudicator. Peter Harvey, I want to say, is the guy handling that appeal. But for Alvin Kamara, it seems like the NFL is, instead of putting him on the commissioner's exempt list like they have done in the past with Adrian Peterson and the child abuse allegations, they have clear evidence of what Kamara did, and instead of doing something like putting him on the commissioner's exempt list while they wait for this situation to unfold, they're just going to go ahead and let him play this year. That's a little bit surprising considering the NFL's track record with off-the-field incidents, etc. But I guess this is more of the same from the NFL, unpredictable punishments, etc. But for Kamara, his suspension is going to come in 2023. Initially, when I first saw the assault and all the news coming out from it, I was surprised the NFL wasn't already going to ban him for a year at that point. It's now been a significant amount of time, cooler heads have prevailed, and I'm still surprised that the NFL hasn't at least put him on the commissioner's exempt list. And in fact, I would have suspended him for the entire year based on the actions he took. If you ever get to read up on the police report of what happened, the completely blindsided the dude. It wasn't even the guy that he thought was doing something wrong, or the guy that he thought was doing something wrong. He just flat attacked this guy. And, I mean, the guy ended up in the hospital with severe injuries. It was not a good look for the NFL, especially on Pro Bowl weekend as they're trying to celebrate with the Vegas Pro Bowl, trying to get things set up for the draft, etc., etc. Things just didn't go well. Welcome in, Texas. Appreciate you. Yeah, I think it was the correct move as well. I'm a little bit surprised they did it right here in August, but they needed to make a change before the end of the season, I thought, just so they could get somebody in there with a better track record, postseason success, etc. But like I said, mixed messages anyway from the NFL, from the Watson suspension, the Ridley suspension, and now the lack of action anyway with the Alvin Kamara suspension. If you ever get a chance, like I said, to read up on the police report, everything that went down, if you ever get to see some of the clips from it, it's brutal. He should be, as far as the NFL standards anyway, of locking him up, throwing away the key, etc., of the commissioner's exempt list, that's pretty much the equivalent of that in the NFL. That's what should have happened for Deshaun Watson. That's what should have happened for Alvin Kamara. That may end up happening for Deshaun Watson, but it doesn't sound like that's what's going to happen for Alvin Kamara. So Kamara, I'm sorry, but your actions were appalling, and he apologized to the guy afterward when he realized what he had done. But sorry doesn't fix all the injuries he gave that gentleman. Sorry, it just doesn't get it done. But that's kind of your latest out of the New Orleans Saints anyway. He was arrested on felony battery, and so we'll see how the legal situation ends up resolving for him. But expect a suspension next year. In fact, I would expect a year-long suspension based on how egregious the assault or the battery was for him. But let's move on to the next bit of news out of the Denver Broncos. Again, an injury in the preseason has led to another veteran linebacker, defensive end, getting a spot. Joe Schobert has been signed by the Denver Broncos as an interior linebacker. I expect him to also break the 53-man roster with them as they need some depth after Griffin anyway went down due to injury. Minor league experience, looking and evaluating our young prospects. Good timing. See the young ones shine and grow. Exactly. Well, that's what they've done, and that's what Chris Woodward's has really done over the last 4 years with the Texas Rangers. I don't think he deserves all the hate he's been getting as far as the development that he's been there, how hard it's been for him to field a competitive team with the limitations the management has given him. So don't be so hard on Chris Woodward. But I do agree the time had just come for him to be gone. His management style as far as trusting players beyond the point that he really should, how he put players in very disadvantageous situations. Think back to earlier in the season when how he handled Danny Santana in that game anyway, the extra inning game. He apologized to him after the game for how he handled that, and you just can't have that from a veteran manager, especially as long as he's been at the helm now. Just the mistakes that were constantly adding up, and it's time for the Rangers to get a more veteran voice in there. Last bit of news out of the NFL anyway. The Cleveland Browns are still looking for a starting center. It seems like they're going to go with Ethan Posich as their starting center now that Nick Harris is out for the year. You might remember that J.C. Tretter, the NFLPA president, was the center there for the Cleveland Browns. They cut him in a cost-cutting move. They were not willing to negotiate a new contract. It seems like there's a little bit of tension there between the two sides. Of course, the NFLPA and the NFL always have their issues, but it seems like those negotiations may have even spilled over between team and player. Unfortunate to see, as Treader, of course, is one of the top 5 or 10 centers in the league, and he's still out there on a free agent market. I expect the Browns to eventually circle back to him and say, hey, let bygones be bygones, we'll let you back on a 1-year deal. And I also expect the Tampa Bay Buccaneers to at least give him a call to say, hey, with Jensen out for the year, maybe he comes back for the postseason, but for the year, we need somebody to come in here and be our starting center. Maybe that's the route they go, but the Bucs already have a good backup center in-house in Hainsley. We'll see what route they end up going ultimately. But J.C. Tretter is one of the best starting centers on the market right now, and it's still surprising to see him out there, especially considering he's the NFLPA president. But it seems like he's let his job as an NFLPA president interfere with his contract negotiations with other teams. Sad to see, but he really needs to solve that problem before he can sign another deal. Moving on to the NHL, there is a little bit of news out of the NHL today. The Vancouver Canucks gave permission to their goalie, Michael DiPietro, to seek a trade. Now, DiPietro is going to be 4th on that depth chart, just really hasn't been able to establish himself. Former 3rd-round pick is 23 years old this year, had a .901 save percentage last year. And just not going to get it done, though, for the Vancouver Canucks. They weren't really going to rely on him as a backup guy. In fact, they weren't even going to rely on him as a 3rd stringer. But maybe another team sees them as a good 3rd string option on their roster, giving up maybe a 4th, 5th round pick for him, something like that. But it seems like DiPietro's time in Vancouver is done. We'll see if he can latch on somewhere else. The news out of the NHL as far as free agency, though, Tyler Mott is drawing a lot of interest. We mentioned Nazem Kadri the other day. Now attention is turned to Tyler Mott, kind of a depth player, can play up and down in your lineup anyway. He can play first line minutes, second line, third line, fourth line, kind of that grit guy, has a little bit of skill as well. Played his time, of course, with the New York Rangers, has spent time with the Canucks, has spent time with the Chicago Blackhawks. I remember him with the Chicago Blackhawks when he was thought of more of as a offensive type of weapon. Now he's more of a glue guy, grit type of a player. Nice to see him evolve after he wasn't able to find that offensive game so much at the NHL level, but he certainly is going to command a significant contract. He was on a $1.65 million deal, I believe, last year, or 2.5, somewhere in there. It seems like this is going to be his one big bite at the apple. He's 27 years old, so I expect he's hoping to get a deal somewhere around 4 years, maybe $3 million per, something like that would be a great contract for Tyler Mott. And the last bit of news out of the NHL, longtime NHL veteran anyway, Colton Sevier has agreed to go to the Swiss League. So he's going to play next year in Switzerland. Good luck, Colton Sevier. Remember you from your time with the Dallas Stars, Colorado Avalanche, and Florida Panthers. Always around that 3rd, 4th line. Had a great debut with the Dallas Stars anyway, and hope nothing but the best for you in the Swiss League. But just to kind of recap around Major League Baseball, Walker Buehler is now out for the year. Dodgers, of course, short on pitching, are going to get Dustin May back as they try to go for the stretch drive here. Of course, they have the top seed out in the NL anyway, so we'll see if they can continue to hold on to that spot as their starting pitching starts to have the wheels fall off the bus. Clayton Kershaw is still out due to injury. He's on the injured list. And then with the Walker Buehler news, it sounds like he may even miss the start of next year, depending on how serious this flexor strain is. He's already been out since June 10th. They thought just by shutting him down for 8 to 10 weeks, that was the best course of action to get him back for the postseason run. Unfortunately, that was the wrong course of action, as it hasn't done anything. In fact, it's gotten things worse, and so it's tough to see for a great pitcher like Walker Buehler. He seemed to be the next great pitcher along the lines of Kershaw, Verlander, Scherzer, DeGrom, in that class of player, and we're just not going to get to see him pitch this postseason. Tough break for Dodger fans, tough break for baseball fans. You never want to win against a team that's depleted due to injury, but for the Dodgers, though, nobody's going to cry for you. You got to pick it up and continue to have those young guys perform, and so we'll see if they can. Biggest news out of baseball, though, is that the Texas Rangers have fired their manager anyway, in Chris Woodward. He spent 4 years with the team anyway, had a below 500 record, had a really tough time anyway after replacing Jeff Bannister. The team wanted to kind of cut payroll and try to sink to the bottom, recoup their prospect base, and then try to build back forward anyway. Of course, with the pandemic, that threw things off as well. More wrenches into the mix. He was a great guy as far as development, great guy on and off the field as far as a guy. But as far as on-field decision-making, it seems he got worse, not better, over his tenure. Just his handling of bullpen, late-game situations, the way he handled his pitchers left a lot to be desired, and that's why the Rangers were looking for somebody to kind of take over the rest of this year in Tony Beasley. So he'll be kind of that friendly face for the team going forward. Tough break for Corey Seager, as he was probably part of the reason anyway why he signed with the Texas Rangers was his relationship with Chris Woodward. But the Rangers were able to get the contract done with Corey Seager. We'll see how he does going forward. But for the Texas Rangers, they're looking to bring in a coach with at least some acumen, some playoff success, somebody who can get them over the hump and keep them in the postseason year in and year out. With the prospect base that they've built up over the last couple of years, the Oakland A's are, of course, in the bottom of that division. The Astros seem to have petered out a little bit as far as the top-end talent in their system. They've only got a couple more years left at the top of the peak there in the AL West. And then I think the Rangers and Mariners are going to be right there. In fact, depending upon the moves that both teams make, they both could compete with the Astros for the division crown as soon as next year. But for the Texas Rangers, getting rid of Chris Woodward is what a lot of you fans wanted, and now you finally have your wish. Just hope you realize that now that Chris Woodward's gone, you have to be able to replace him. So who do you want to see him go for? Let us know in the comment section what you'd like to see the Rangers do. Who do you see them bringing in? I don't see them going after a long in the tooth type of a manager along the lines of a Tony La Russa, Joe Girardi, or Joe Madden. Maybe they go a little bit younger, somebody who's had some postseason success but let go by another team. Something like that might be of interest to them, but we'll see where they end up going with their manager spot this offseason. The NBA, Giannis, of course, having interesting comments about the city of Chicago and the Chicago Bulls, saying that who wouldn't want to play for Chicago? It's a great city, great team, great history. A little bit worrisome to Bucks fans. He's going to have to clean that up tomorrow as far as his intention of those comments, but it sounds like Giannis is at least open to thinking about moving in a couple of years. Imagine all the trade talk that's going to keep coming if they have any issues going forward. Moving on to the NFL, we've already talked a little bit about the Alvin Kamara move, that he's going to be suspended next year, not this year because of his felony battery. The Denver Broncos have activated Randy Gregory. The Baltimore Ravens have activated Marcus Peters, both of which should be great boons for their teams. The Bucks have signed defensive end Carl Nassif, outside linebacker anyway, and hopefully he can resurrect his career there. Dolphins have signed Mackenzie Alexander to replace Trill Williams on their roster, probably going to compete for that 3-4 spot. And the Browns, of course, are going to need a center this year. They have turned for now to Ethan Posich. You might remember him from the Chicago Bears. But it seems like J.C. Tretter, the NFLPA president and is formerly of the Cleveland Browns, has let his duties as the NFLPA president interfere with his next contract with the team. So just a hard break there. And, of course, the Deshaun Watson still has some news out there, is that he's likely going to get a 1-year suspension, maybe an indefinite suspension, after appeal from the NFL to arbiter Peter Harvey. Remember the Sue Robinson suspension that he got for 6 games? Seems like the NFL is just having more issues with their suspension protocol. Imagine that's going to be hammered out in the next CBA. At least I hope it does. It's been an issue now in the last 2 CBAs, but we'll see if the NFLPA can finally get that part right. Now, you don't want to necessarily cater your collective bargaining agreement to just a couple of players. I mean, there are a lot of players in the NFL, and there's only a few of them that fall under this issue. But it would be nice to have some resolution, as a lot of fans out there can see these issues that are happening, and it's impacting the fans' experience of the game. So we'll see what ends up happening. But the inconsistency of the suspension for Watson, the suspension for Ridley, the non-suspension so far for Kamara leaves a lot to be desired from the NFL. We'll see if they can clean up those issues going forward. And then, of course, in the NHL, the Canucks have given permission to goalie Michael DiPietro to request a trade. And then Tyler Mott is getting interest from 5 or 6 teams as we get closer and closer to training camp anyway for the NHL. But yeah, at least he can play the rest of the preseason games. I wonder if the team asked him to step away if he is suspended for a year. I'd imagine they'd immediately turn to Jimmy Garoppolo in the event that Watson is suspended for the entire year. So if you're a Browns fan, sounds like you're going to have a good quarterback. Maybe not a great quarterback this year like you'd hoped for in Deshaun Watson, but at least you're going to have competent quarterback play to probably lock up at least one postseason spot, maybe even win you a game, but I don't think it gets you any further than that. The issues that you have on that team, the pieces that you brought in, you're too good, and yet you still have some issues to kind of clean up this year. Hopefully you can do that, and then next year you're going to be able to set off like gangbusters. Of course, the Browns still have the issue of Kareem Hunt to deal with as well. His trade request, maybe they're able to work a trade for, say, like a Josh Jacobs. I still don't believe the Raiders when they said that they weren't showcasing Josh Jacobs in the Hall of Fame game. Why in the world would Josh Jacobs take carries, many carries for a preseason game anyway, when it doesn't matter at all and you have 5 running backs on the roster competing for a spot. If Josh Jacobs' roster spot is secure, why is he even dressed for the game? So I don't believe the smoke that's coming out of the Raiders. I believe if they get a decent offer, they're going to trade Josh Jacobs, and maybe a trade for Kareem Hunt might make a lot of sense. Save on some salary for Josh Jacobs and give the extension that Kareem Hunt wants to get. But thank you guys for joining us. Appreciate all the support. We're going to have a live for you tomorrow night. We're going to do the Mets and Braves game at 6:20. I know we were going to do one tonight, but we've finally cleaned up our presentation here, and we're very excited to bring you our new daily update. You'll notice that the update actually says Upside DSU. That's going to be the new way we abbreviate it. That way we can include a little bit of headlines at the back end. That way you guys know what to keep an eye out for in case you do miss the live and you want to watch it later on. That way it's not just generic with today's date. But if you see Upside DSU, that means it's the Upside Daily Sports Update. We're also going to continue with our podcast. We'll release another one on Wednesday morning. We will tape that for you guys tomorrow. Appreciate all the support. And like I said, tomorrow we'll have our live beginning at 6:20 anyway for the Mets and Braves. Thank you guys again for joining us here at the Upside. Appreciate all the help and hope you guys have enjoyed the new layout as much as we've enjoyed getting it together for you. Thank you guys, and y'all have a great evening.